Hello everyone, this is Samir from Audio Science Review. We're going back to school again, this time on a topic that's become a noose around my neck. Seems like every other day I do a review, somebody complains about me listening too loud or testing speakers and headphones too loud. And there's actually a lot to this topic, and much of it seems to be unknown given the fact that many people get this wrong, and this is not unique to people in one camp or the other. I find both camps, whether objectivists or subjectivists, get all this wrong, including reviewers and people who claim to know the topic, but in my opinion, clearly do not. So I thought I'd make a PowerPoint presentation. I was hoping that once I left the corporate world, I would never touch PowerPoint again. But here I am. I don't know how else to convey this topic and keep it in some kind of organized fashion. So here we go. I've called it Music, How Loud is Loud. Let's start with what I call Prosecutions Exhibit 1. And this actual comment somebody made when I posted a review of the Hi-Fi Man Ananda a couple days ago. And the literal comment was, if you're listening 94 dB, you need to get your ears checked. And it's a shorthand notation to what people typically say. If you push them on where you get that number, they go to various workplace safety standards as far as noise. In US, that's part of the OSHA government standards setting body that sets limits for industrial noise exposure that employers have to follow. Otherwise, they could be subject to litigation and fines and what have you. And they usually go bring up this table. This individual did not, and then they point to various things in here, like I run a test at 114 dB SPL, and they quickly say, "Oh, you're going to go deaf in 15 minutes." And even at higher limits, let's say lower limits, let's say 105 dB SPL. It says, oh, only 1 hour. Clearly, we don't listen to music for just 1 hour. We may listen 7, 8 hours. This must be a terrible thing. I should point out that the 94 dB SPL comes in my testing for headphones from my calibration of my headphone fixture. I'll have a specific instrument that generates a tone at 94 dB very accurately, and you put it in the fixture, and then you measure the microphone voltage, and you match the two, and that is what my fixture's calibrated as. Therefore, it's most accurate at that setting. It's probably almost as good at other ones, but I know for sure that 94 dB is properly calibrated as far as SPL. And then that gets us to this graph I was just talking about, the 94, 104, 114. Where did these three numbers come from? 94 I just explained, which is my reference test for frequency response. I also picked this because it's loud enough that overrides the room noise where I'm measuring headphone, especially open back headphones, kind of letting room noise in there. And you want your signal to be substantially 30 to 40 dB above the room noise so that when you measure frequency response and distortion, what have you, the error is well below 1% there. So I have 94 dB, and that's where that 94 comes from. There's no industry standard of what you measure frequency response at, so I had to pick something. I have a nice situation that I've used a topping A90 headphone amplifier, and has 3 gain switches, and each one of them is separated by 10 dB. So all I've got to do to measure 104 dB is just flip a switch, and then at 114 I'll flip the switch again. And the key with that is that I don't have to muck with the volume control and lose my setting. So I just flip a switch 3 different ways and capture 3 settings. And like this Abyss Diana V2 headphone, you can see that there's 3 levels of measurements that have been made. I'm just showing you the distortion graph in here. People immediately zoom into what is 114 and say, why the heck are you measuring at 114? I never ever listen at 114. Heck, I don't listen at 104 or even 94. I listen at 70 dB, 75 dB, 80 dB. None of this matters to me, so this is all bogus, and you must not know what you're doing. Well, I think I know what I'm doing, but let's continue and let me demonstrate that to you. So How loud is loud? This is actually a larger topic that's been researched a fair bit into what kind of dynamic range do we need in our systems to reproduce basically a live event. Everybody's dream of hi-fi is that it takes you, as if you were listening to a concert or a live performance, and you want to bring that home, right? That is our ultimate vision of what a hi-fi system should do. So Louis Fielder, that worked at Dolby, he's an AES fellow. He was also a president of Audio Engineering Society for a few years. Wrote a couple of very intensively researched papers. They're peer-reviewed. They're part of the Journal of Audio Engineering Society, not to be confused with the conference papers. The journal papers have to be really authoritative and detailed. There's no automatic that is right, but it's got to feel good to a bunch of other peers of that person that this breaks new ground as far as information is sharing. And he's written at least 2 papers, maybe 3, that dig into this topic of what is the 2 extremes that we need to represent in music. What's the loudest that we want to have? What's the quietest we want to have? And once you have those 2 numbers, that differential tells you the dynamic range you need. And and that gives you a dB value. If you divide it by 6, you'll get the number of bits you need on this. So it's a very useful thing. And Dolby obviously is interested in this from, movie soundtracks and what have you. The paper's old, as you can see from the typeface. So this was probably 10 or 20 years ago. 20 years ago, maybe it came out on this thing. So he starts off with going back, say, all right, what is a live performance? How loud is a live performance? And he cites some of the early work that other people had done, not as exacting as he's done. And very surprising information. For example, there was the researcher by the name of Sivian, and just 2 pianos playing. The peak SPL was 103 to 104 dB. So those of you who say, listen, 70 dB, it's like a piano is not a drum. It's what people think. I mean, people who actually listen to it know that it can get quite loud. But to a layperson, thinks, the piano is nothing, it's not very loud. Well, it can get very loud. He also researched a 15-piece orchestra. That was 112 dB SPL. On this thing. Another study over here, they came up with numbers of 114 or 122 dB for classical and popular music. So you can see there's some kind of consensus building up. These numbers are not in 70, 80 dB. Then there were some tests done in recording studios, and that was between 111 and 180 dB SPL. And I tell you, I've been to major labels, and when they play in their mixing rooms and mastering rooms, they play quite loud. It's not like what you think, just background music on this thing. So this was the following of that same paragraph. You can see that it goes as high as 125 dB SPLs, different recording locations. Now, Louis tried to actually set up his own test, and there's 2 versions of this. This is the more extensive one. Like I said, there's another earlier paper, and that he found that the measures that he measured as much as 122 dB for classical and 124 dB SPL for this electronically augmented country music. And I'll show you the second test that he did where that wasn't the case. So he went and surveyed 47 different basically live presentations, and this is not him showing up, standing in the middle of the stage and measuring. He actually sits in the rows and actually tells you row 6 or whatever in what theater he sat in, and or concert hall he sat in, and he measured this using a special peak detection SPL meter, which I'll talk about later on. And you can see the range of numbers in here. Rock music obviously can get pretty loud, 115 dB to 129 dB SPL, but jazz music, for example, 127 dB for jazz. So this is not some heavy metal rock and roll, music where people are just going deaf in there. It's what people think is, sort of adult music, and it's quite loud. So he has this histogram over here of all the different venues and how many of them were at what level. And the ones in black actually are unamplified. That means just the instruments themselves producing sound. So people think, oh yeah, with massive PA speakers and arrays, you can, crank the level to anything you want. And indeed, those do capture the highest levels over here, electronic augmentation. But with no amplification, you can see that we have a number of the venues that you want to easily land in 120, 125 dB SPL in here. So, if you look at down here, there's nothing below 90. I mean, it just goes land over here. A lot of these, if you look at where the distribution is between 105 and 115 dB SPL. So, quite loud. Again, these are real people listening in a real seating location in a live venue of all different kinds of music, and these are the levels that he found. So for sure, forget about this concept of, oh, I'm listening 70, 80 dB. I guarantee you don't have a concept of it, loudness or dB when you say numbers like that. He goes on then, as I mentioned, he defines the peak, and then he also defines the floor. And many of you are probably familiar with the Fletcher-Munson equal contour hearing or loudness level curves. This is the lowest one in there. It's called the hearing threshold. And it basically says that if you take the frequency and you play a sine wave, the lowest level sine wave that people can hear follows this curve. So it is not at all a flat line that we think frequency response is. Our hearing is pretty bad at 20 hertz. It requires 65 dB just to hear 20 hertz, 65 decibels. So when you tell me you listen at 70 dB, that means you're not ever hearing 20 hertz. It's only 5 dB above threshold. It just is nothing. But the same 65 dB here at 2 or 3 kilohertz is about 70 dB above your threshold of hearing. So frequency matters. Your hearing is extremely nonlinear with respect to this. Now, know that when music's being created, a human being also sat there and evaluated loudness with the same ears that you have. So this curve has been built into the music, and it builds into your hearing as well. So in a way, it is a flat perceived curve, but in reality, the hearing follows this kind of curve. So when the person is mixing, mastering music, he's creating bass that goes way above 65 dB for it to be heard. Otherwise, let's say it's at 50 dB, it's totally silent. So he clearly is not going to, or she is not going to create music that has, you can't hear. So turn it up, listen to it, and therefore the bass content, which I'll show you in a minute, will definitely be a lot louder than it is in this range. Okay, so this is a good paper if you want to go find it. And basically, he builds a case saying that, look, the lowest level we want is around below 0 dB. And if the maximum is 122 dB or 125 dB, we basically need about 21 bits of dynamic range to have a silent noise floor and be able to create a live music venues sound level in our channel. So anything below 21 dB, what we call flat PCM encoded, is going to have a noise floor that's audible, or it can't get that loud. But that's fun at the topic, and I've got an article on that I'll reference later on for you. So we've got this background of what is real, what is a real dB, what are peak levels, and I'll talk about peak versus average a little bit later. But what is all these noise standards? I mean, clearly, if you're sitting there listening to music, there's no police there showing up saying, "Whoa, all of these people listen to this jazz concert." Or two pianos going to go deaf after an hour or two of that, and why isn't there articles and all that saying, hey, any kind of live music is going to make you go deaf? There isn't, but I'll talk about why there isn't, why they're completely different domains. People usually cite this OSHA standard, which I talked about, a little bit bigger picture over here, and they have this graph, and you can see by 100 dB is getting into this yellow range, and boom, by 120 dB is well into the red zone. First of all, what is this number? You look at it in here. It doesn't say dB SPL, it says dBA. The A means is A-weighted. What does A-weighted means? It means you capture the sound in the environment and you apply a filter to it, a frequency response shaping to it, and you throw out a bunch of stuff, and what comes out is what you measure as one number, by the way, not a sequence of numbers for different frequencies, but only a single number. So what does A-weighting look like? If you go to Wikipedia, you see that this light blue curve is the A-weighting. So you take let's say the noise that's out there is uniform, at 0 dB, you run it through a software or hardware that chops off basically all the low frequencies. Look at how much at 20 hertz is chopping up 50 decibels. And then at 1 kilohertz, 2 kilohertz, 3 kilohertz, it doesn't chop off anything. And then at high frequencies, it starts to chop off some of it again. Why does it do that? Because remember, this is inverse of our hearing, what I was showing in Fletcher-Munson curves and Fielder's threshold of hearing. It's because they recognize that we don't hear low frequencies that well, so our hearing naturally is a filter of low frequencies. It takes a ton of low frequencies for us to be able to hear that. Therefore, why put significance on that when clearly it's not going to be an audible thing, it's not going to be something that damages our hearing. So when my measurements are provided, they're all raw, they're all dB/SPLs. That means there's no weighting applied to it. You can't compare the weighted versus unweighted measurements. They're completely different animals, especially in low frequencies, as I mentioned. So in here, again, 50 decibels is filtered out before the government says, let's measure to see how bad this is. So this becomes quite important, and I'll show you that again. If you look at my headphone measurements, you see this preference curve, and ignore this boost for now. You can see that it sort of, in blue, it curves up and curves down. Why? Because our hearing, our ears and ear canals are resonant chambers, and they amplify a certain range of frequencies. And they're most sensitive in this sort of a 2 to 5 kilohertz or 1 to 5 kilohertz. Down here, sensitivity goes down, and you can see what a difference it makes in that it goes way down. So you don't want loud sounds in this region because the ear then amplifies it again and subjects it to your hearing system, and you could damage the hair cells and cause nerve damage. So you don't want to, this is the area that's danger zones, and that's what the government cares about. Basically, A-weighting says, let's chop all this down way down here. So loudness in this area is not something that the government cares about, the safety standards care about. They care about mid frequencies. They also don't care about extreme highs as much, but certainly they don't care about the bass frequencies. So that brings us to a major punchline in that when music is created, it always follows this exponential curve where all the energy is in the bass, most of the energy is in the bass, and then gradually it declines till you get higher and higher. Now, on purpose, I picked an instrumental track. This Chris Jones's No Sanctuary. This used to be the demo track. It's very well recorded. 20 years ago, it got overplayed and doesn't get played anymore. But go and look it up on YouTube, or if you have subscription music, look it up. It's a delightful track, and it's an instrumental thing. It's in strings. It's a male vocal. So I didn't go pick some heavy metal tracks or techno or what have you. I picked an instrumental, sort of a adult music, if you will. And you can look in here and say at 30 hertz, the relative level is 20 dB below the maximum that we could have 0 dB digital. But then as you get to 1 kilohertz, we're already down 40 decibels. So if the government cares about how loud something is at 1 kilohertz, if you take that same loudness, you're allowed to have 40 dB more in bass. So if the government says, hey, 90 dB is as high as I want you to go at 1 kilohertz, that means actually saying, hey, the bass can be 130 dB and that's cool too. So keep that in mind, that the energy in music is in this bass area. It is not. Now, intuitively, you should know that. You look at the driver sizes in your speakers, the woofer is giant and the tweeter is little thing, right? The woofer is moving in and out massively. The tweeter, you can't even see it move. So it should make sense that the energy in music is in bass, yet the safety standards don't care about bass loudness. They care about the mid to high frequency loudness. We actually care a lot about bass because bass represents 30% of the fidelity that consumers or listeners assign to the overall sound of a system. So it's super important to us, but it's not super important to the people who care about hearing protection. Now, this is a big confusion of difference between peak and average loudness. They're completely different animals. When you look at music, you know, a drum gets hit, all of a sudden you get a spike, and that spike could be just 2 or 3 milliseconds. It doesn't last the whole second, doesn't last the whole hour, doesn't last 30 minutes. Now, somebody going and working the factory floor, and there's a machinery that's cranking, that noise floor is constant. Listen to a washing machine at your house, or the fan in a microwave oven, or what have you. Those are constant levels of noise that just continuously go on. Music is impulsive, meaning that we have peaks, and the peaks last so little that there is no safety standards for 1 millisecond of anything. Now, don't take this to the extreme, but I'm pretty sure if I played 1 millisecond at 140 dB, you just do this and be done. Your hearing is not going to get, damaged in just that 1 millisecond on this thing. So now, this also, then let's talk about how do you measure something like this? The way you do not measure it is by a SPL meter. You cannot measure it with SPL meters. SPL meters integrate things over time, and they also have their own frequency response. Worst thing is they go get a phone like this. You don't even know what the microphone frequency response on this thing is, or how accurate any of that is. And at any rate, they're way, way, way too slow. As I mentioned in the Fielder's research, he actually built his own peak detection SPL meter, and that's what he used to find those numbers. If you had gone into the same venue with your phone and turned it on, you'd get 10 or 20 dB, 30 dB lower values because the peaks and the lowest amounts are getting averaged together, and you're not getting a sense of what the peak amplitude is. So you may have thought you were in a music concert listening to jazz music and it was 90 dB, but in reality the peaks may have been 110, 120 on that. Okay. I've actually written a paper on how you determine what is wrong with an SPL meter for purposes of setting a dynamic range, which I talked about in the research paper. If you're interested, I'll put this in the description to go and read. It's a nice summary of the paper and talks about high resolution audio and the considerations there. But anyway. There are ways to measure this, but requires a fair bit of knowledge in what you're doing. And one of our kind members goes by the name of Solder Dude. He actually runs a site called DIY Audio Haven, and he has tons of headphone measurements and good articles. He's an electrical engineer practicing one, and he set out to actually measure the average to peak of common music. He just grabbed a piece of music, and I forget, was it Tracy Chapman or some common pop music track, and he listened to it at different levels and then took a 10-second section of that music and quantified what that level is as far as loudness, both subjectively and as far as peak and average SPLs. So he grabbed this part of it and he was listening at what he called comfortably loud. To me, that's what I like. You're enjoying it, but you know that your ears are not suffering there. You're turning it up, you're enjoying the music, you're not listening to his background music while you're doing other work, you're enjoying it. In that, he measured 90 dB average and a peak of 102 dB. Not 70 dB, not 80 dB, 102 decibels was comfortably loud. Yet when I showed you at the start of the presentation, somebody told me if I'm listening to 94 dB, I need to have my hearing checked. This is basically 90 dB he's listening, and he's not going deaf. And he actually goes through when it gets uncomfortable. I think it was like 112 or something is when he got uncomfortable. And then he goes where it's faint on this thing. So absolutely you can't run by those numbers you do. My first question when people tell me, that's too loud, I say, how do you measure your headphones? How do you know how loud you're listening to? And the way you do that, you measure the voltages. And in this case, you use the storage scope. And the storage scope has this nice meters where it captures the peak voltages. In this case, it's putting the cursor at the peak voltage that it detected. And then he's able to use that, both the peak and RMS value is shown in here as voltages. He then takes those and using the efficiency of that headphone, which Tile had measured inner fidelity, I think it was an HT650 headphone, and converted that to dB. And, Tile's efficiency numbers, is approximate, but it's good enough for this kind of analysis, at least, on this thing. So, real practical example, great work done. You can go in here and check it out. And he's one of the people, when I go in and correct people that this stuff's not too loud, he always kindly points out that that's the case also. One of the interesting things that at 94 dB SPL, I can actually wear the headphone on my ears and hear the sweep. Bass is barely loud on that. The mid to highs get a little bit uncomfortable, but I can listen to it because the sweep is like 1.5 seconds. It's like, it's done. He actually repeated that exercising, came back and reported, said, yeah, you can listen 94 dB and, you don't go deaf. So now let's, skin this cat in another direction. THX used to be a very big name in home theater, not as much of a brand these days, but back in the day it was. And THX has set up some certification levels for how loud and how much dynamic range products need to have. Their business is home theater focused. And there for the speakers and amplifiers, it says that you have to be able to play an average of 85 dB, but have 20 dB of headroom, which means that you need to be able to produce 105 dB SPL. And anything THX certified needs to be able to do this. And you find basically commodity products that are capable of having this certification on them. For the subwoofer, which is what we care about, why I do a lot of my measurements in low frequencies, actually is 115 dB SPL is what is required to get the certification. You can have more, but that's the minimum that they require on this thing. So that again proves that we can tolerate sub bass a lot higher. No way would THX have a certification program that would cause manufacturers to build equipment and cause people to go deaf. Right, the liability for that would be huge. So clearly, they understand the topic, and there's a distinction between peak of 115 dB versus an average of 85 dB. So here they basically say you can have 30 dB of dynamic range or peak headroom on this thing. Now, one of the key things, key reasons I measure at 3 different levels, it isn't for frequency response because you could just have one of them, but looking at distortion as a trend, because a lot of times we go in there and we want to boost the low frequencies. Harman's research has shown that preference that people have in headphones is to not only have flat response, but actually have elevated bass. And I find that in sub-bass area, it is essential to get a great sensation out of headphones that you actually cannot get out of speakers. Speakers give you a mechanical feel, which is wonderful, but to have a speaker or even with a sub that's flat to 20 hertz is extremely hard. Whereas with headphones, hey, I could have a $100 headphone that goes flat to 20 hertz or even above flat at 20 hertz. So since we can have that, might as well get it. But what you don't want to do is have a ton of distortion that goes with that, or clipping or crackling and what have you. One of the tests I've done, it's a little bit of work, I don't always do it, is that I've measured distortion pre-equalization and then post-equalization. So here I did it with this Focal Clear. You can see the baseline is this blue line here. So that's just measuring itself. And here you can see there's only 0.5% distortion. But the moment I equalize it just a few dB, notice that if I don't allow headroom for now, ignore the phi one, look at how much distortion shoots up. All of a sudden goes from half dB, shoots up to 12%, I mean half a percent to 12% distortion. So how do you know that this could happen? Well, you look at, if I go to the first, this is the kind of graph that tells you that. If you notice on here, when I'm playing 94, the distortion is way down here. But when I add 10 more dB, distortion jumps this much. When I add 10 more after that, all of a sudden distortion goes through the roof. So you can predict how much equalization you have to do, whether you land from, if you go from this graph to the red one, or you're going to go into this green one. So a lot of times when I do headphone reviews, when I see this third curve is under control, and I say, hey, that's a good thing. That means you can add a lot of equalization and still not have noticeable problems in there. So continuing on, a lot of the comments that I get is sort of personal, in that people try to take a jab at me, both from point of view of, oh, I know more than you do, and, oh, wait a second, you don't seem to know anything. Why do you have to test these things this way? But step back, say, I see my job in being the most critical user of equipment there is, and an analyzer of equipment. I need to be able to have stressful enough measurements and listening tests where I can separate even two excellent products. I don't want to say, well, there's 100 products that are all just as good as each other. What's the point of that? I devise both listening tests and measurements where I can tease out differences there in any product. That, I come at it from different angles, and I want to find those cracks in there. Now, 99% of you may not push the thing as hard, but the 1% of you that do, I want to be able to represent your views as well. Last thing I want to do is recommend a product, and you come back and say, hey, wait a second, when I listen to my favorite music, I'm hearing this distortion. You didn't say anything about distortion in there. So, all right, well, I need to then be able to test that. So when I'm listening to a headphone, I crank up the volume for like a second or two and say, hey, what is happening to the bass? Can I hear that distortion that I measured? How audible is that distortion? I crank it up and I'm like, oh, it got really bad, turn it down. Or I crank it up and I'm like, wow, there's no distortion. This sounds great. So my listening tests are designed for that kind of thing. I heavily value my hearings because that's my job. This is what I do right now. It's my hobby. So please don't go make an asinine remark that, oh, this guy's blowing his eardrums and I'm not going to listen to him ever. He must be deaf by now. No, I'm able to beat many people in controlled blind tests because I do protect my hearing, and I know the damage that this can cause. Maybe 10 years from now, I'll regret doing this a little bit 1 or 2 second testing also. But, I do turn it up. When I'm listening to music myself, I'm not in testing mode. I listen to music 6-7 hours a day. And there I'm listening at background level music while I'm working with my headphones. And then all of a sudden I land on a track in my title subscription, and I'm like, hey, that sounds good. Crank it up. Yeah, that sounds good. You're enjoying that, and then turn it back down. And your ears will tell you that, hey, it's getting too loud, getting too annoying, turn it down. So please separate out what I do for you all versus what I do myself. It's quite insulting to have people come back and say, oh, you must be so dumb to be listening to loud music all the time. That's not what I do. One key thing is that it's very hard to know what these distortion numbers mean. So how audible is this? It shows you distortion from 0.5% up to 12%. Was it a terrible thing? I have to listen. If I don't listen, who's going to listen? You all going to want to go test that hypothesis? No, it's my job to do that comparison. So I turn on the EQ and I turn on the volume and say, hey, did I hear any distortion or did I not? If I didn't, well, then EQ is good. If I hear distortion, then I pull the EQ down, even though from tonality point of view, I may have needed that much bass. And I said, no, that's just getting too distorted or it's getting too bright. I got to pull that down. A great example came up tonight. This should say ELEX. Let me fix it before I've got a second sample of this Focal ELEX and was listening to it, and I just was listening to the normal volume, and all of a sudden I hear the left headphone cup starting to crackle a little bit, and I went up a little bit more, and the right one did. And this is with EQ turned on, so the bass has been boosted. And I tell you, it just was not loud music. Yes, there was deep bass, and yes, I had EQ'd it. It was just normal, good level of listening. But I thought, well, shoot, if I just say that, you're all going to come back and say, many people have been saying that my, focal clear or ELEX doesn't do this, and therefore you must be listening at, 20 dB higher, and then you go deaf. But I happen to have my son here who's in his 20s and very sensitive hearing, much better than mine, and I had him listen, and his report was the same. Hey, it's crackling, it's clicking, and to him the sound was not loud. No, he wouldn't listen for hours and hours at that level, but he didn't at all think that, hey, this is, you're listening way too loud before clicking happens. So the crackling was happening, and it's a problem. It's and I've seen just a bare mention of it in some reviews of this series of headphones from Focal. I think that's not right. We need to highlight these problems so that the company knows about it, and even if they don't acknowledge it, I'm sure they read these things eventually, and the next generation will have these problems resolved. No headphone costing nearly $1,000 should just crackle as you turn up the volume on what I consider typical audiophile listening levels. And the fact that you can't hear it because you have the same headphone means nothing. I don't understand why people keep saying, well, I've got one of these and I don't hear it. I'm like, great. But I don't know if you have the same headphone sample as I have. I don't know what music you're listening to. Sure as heck don't know how loud you're listening to because you don't know how to measure it at all. So telling me that you don't hear it doesn't invalidate the fact that I, as a critical tester, can hear it, can validate it, and can stand behind this observation that this is a fatal flaw, a near fatal flaw for this whole series of headphones. I would have given these headphones highest marks possible, but when a headphone crackles, I don't care how good the tonality or resolution is. Once you crackle, you're out of the running on that thing. So it's not a headphone that I would buy personally for that reason. So I'm hoping there's a Focal version 2 or whatever they decide to call it. So long presentations, let me bring us to the end. Let me start with something I didn't talk a lot about. Absolutely protect your hearing. Nothing about this presentation is about convincing you to listen louder. You obviously listen to whatever's enjoyable level for you, and that's fine. And indeed, losing your hearing is a terrible thing. You can't get it back. Maybe in the future, there's some research that helps us, but with both age and loud exposure, you can damage your hearing. But please don't make up empty arguments that shows that you haven't researched and haven't understood the topic whatsoever. Do not throw safety standards as people for enjoying music. Safety standards have weighting in them. They're designed for continuous, obnoxious, factory floor noise or machinery. It is not for music. You never see those people going giving tickets to the concert goers saying, or whoever owns a concert venue, that they're making people go deaf. It just isn't the same animal. Yes, if you're dealing with pure noise, car engine noise, what have you, you go by that. But with respect to music, it is not in the same domain. Do not be fooled with SPL in one place and SPL another. In my opinion, listening in moderation to loud music is fine. I mean, when I go to a concert that's loud, I wear earplugs, or actually keep my fingers in if I don't have earplugs, and I try to stay in the back or something. So I do, there are crazy, situations where you can damage your hearing. But when I'm listening to my system, when I have volume control, beautiful, well-recorded music comes up. It's got good bass, good dynamics. I turn it up. That's what being an audiophile is. If you're just listening to elevated music levels, that's not being audiophile. You may be a music lover, but you're not an audiophile. An audiophile has gotten a great system with great dynamic range, great capability, and wants to have realistic presentation. Yeah, crank it up on this thing. Know that we're basically, loudness is, when we talk about loudness, is essentially how loud the bass can get without distortion. That is the name of the game. That is what we're after. The perceptual loudness for your ears, though, is 1 to 3 kilohertz. And indeed, 100 decibels at 3 kilohertz, you go insane. I mean, your eardrums will blow from one ear, come out the other. But 100 dB at 20 hertz is 30 dB above noise floor, above the threshold. So it just doesn't, it's not an issue. And please don't keep saying, go save your hearing. I know nothing I do impacts my hearing. This is what I do. And as the Mythbusters used to say, I'm who you can call a professional. So I know what I'm doing, but really my practice is not something that's different than other people. Okay, hopefully this was useful to you, and if you weren't interested in the topic itself. And for me, it'll be a great reference to be able to provide to people next time they tell me I'm listening too loud. Okay, see you in a future video. Bye-bye.